Today we will be learning in Yirtzeh Hashem the Sikha of Bechukosai, the second Sikha on Bechukosai in Chelek Yud Beis of Likutei Sichos. As is the case with most of the Sichas in this volume, it's a Rashi Sikha, and it's a Rashi Sikha that's centered on the very last Rashi in Parshas Bechukosai, which is also the last Rashi in the whole Chumash Vayikra. This is a Sikha the Rebbe said in 1965. On our previous occasion, we spoke about how after the Rebbe's mother, Rebbe Chana, passed away in Tishrei of Tafshin Chafei, in Tishrei of 1964, the Rebbe began, by every single Farbrengen, the Rebbe began expounding a Rashi. And in the first year, the Rebbe would speak about the first and or the last Rashi of the Parsha. So this is a Sikha on the last Parsha, the last Rashi of Bechukosai. So a little context over here. This Rashi is on the Psukim which are talking about a mitzvah which is called Meiser Behema. We know that during the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when the Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael, so there are many different trumas and meisers, many different tithes that the Yidden had to give to different recipients. And one of the lesser known ones today, it's probably lesser known because it's not at all practiced today, as the other trumas and meisers to a certain extent, whether it's rabbinic or not, they are practiced, but this one isn't practiced at all, is called Meiser Behema. And Meiser Behema was the obligation that every person who owned a herd of animals had to give 1/10 of his animals. It wasn't really giving it actually. A tenth of the animals had to be brought up to Yerushalayim, where they were brought as a korban in the Beis HaMikdash, and it was eaten by the owners. Actually, the Kehanim got nothing from this. This wasn't the Kehanim. There were certain fats that were brought on the Mizbeach, and the blood was sprinkled on the Mizbeach, but the rest of the animal was eaten by the owners and by their invited guests in Yerushalayim. So, the last psukim of Chumash Vayikra talks about this mitzvah of Meiser Behema, and the pasuk says, "V'chol masar bakar v'tzoin," the masar, which means the tenth of all cattle and all sheep, koil asher yaver tachas hashavet, all that passes beneath the staff, ho asiri, the 10th one, yiyah kodesh lahashem, will be holy to Hashem. What does it mean? The 10th one that passes under the staff. So Rashi brings down from Chazal the way it was done, the way this meiser was separated. It wasn't that you went to your flock and you chose 1 out of 10, whichever one you wanted, but rather all of the animals would be gathered into a pen, and then the animals, as they left the pen, they would put the mothers of the animals outside, so all the animals went to their mothers. And as they left the pen, through a narrow doorway which only allowed 1 at a time, you'd count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And when the 10th one came, you had a stick, and the stick had some ink on it, some red ink on it, and you would pat the 10th one, and therefore, afterwards, when you went outside, you knew that every animal that had some red ink on it, that was meant to be brought as meiser. So the pasuk says, all the animals have to go under the staff, and the 10th one, Yiyah Kodesh LaHashem, shall be holy to Hashem. And then the next pasuk continues and says, Lo Yivaker, you should not inspect Ben Toiv L'Ra. You should not inspect to see whether the animal is a good animal, whether it's a bad animal. And then the pasuk adds another detail, V'lo Yimirenu. Once you have your 10th one, you can't exchange it for another one. You can't say, oh, this animal has the ink on it, but let me bring the other animal instead of it. V'imhamer Yimirenu, and if you do exchange it, then what happens is Vayahu Smurasa Yakodesh, then the animal for which you exchanged it is holy, but they're both holy now. They both have to be brought up as they both have to be brought to Yerushalayim and brought as a korban. So that's what the pasuk says. So Rashi quotes the words from the pasuk Lo Yivaker, which means not to inspect, and Rashi says as follows: Lefi shenemar v'chol mivchar nidrecha, because the pasuk says earlier. Actually, because the pasuk says in Devarim, the pasuk says that you're supposed to bring karbanis from the choicest of your flock. You're supposed to bring your best animals. So yachol yehi boider umeitzi yesayafa. I would think that I should go through my flock and I should take out the nicest animals, the best ones, the fattest ones, for Meiser Behema. Talmud Loimar. Therefore, the pasuk tells us, Lo Yivaker, do not inspect Ben Toiv L'Ra, to see whether it is good or whether it is bad. Bein tam, bein balmum, whether the animal is unblemished, even if it is blemished, chalal of kedusha, it becomes holy. V'loi sheyakriv balmum, which doesn't imply that if the animal has a mum, a blemish, which we know an animal that has a blemish cannot be brought as a carbon, that we bring it as a carbon. Ella ye'achol b'teiras meiser, rather it has to be eaten b'teiras meiser, it has to be eaten as an animal of meiser. V'asur lihigazes uliaved, and you're not allowed to shear the animal, and you're not allowed to do any work with that animal. If it's a bull, you're not allowed to plow your field with it. So Rashi over here is bringing down. First of all, the Rashi is saying is reinforcing this idea that you can't choose the animal that you're going to bring from meiser, and then Rashi brings down that even if the animal happens to be a balmum, nevertheless the kedusha of meiser is chal on it; it takes effect. But it doesn't mean that you bring it as a carbon, but rather it's eaten as an animal of meiser, and you're not allowed to do any work with it. So that's the Rashi. Seems like a pretty simple Rashi, but the Rebbe has a habit of taking Rashis that seem very simple and poking holes in them, and eventually reconstructing them. Okay, so the first thing we need to do whenever we look at a Rashi, and this is the way everyone has always learned Rashi, but the Rebbe placed a specific emphasis on this, is the first question we have to ask is, what's bothering Rashi? We've discussed this in past shiurim, that Rashi is always coming to address a question on an issue. If everything is fine, if everything is smooth, then Rashi doesn't say anything. And we know we go to the Torah, there are many psukim which Rashi doesn't comment on. Rashi has a very clear mandate which he makes for himself, which is, I am coming to give you the pshutei shel mikra, the simple meaning of the pasuk, in a case where it isn't necessarily evident on its own. But Rashi, he tries to, I guess he makes life a little hard for us. He doesn't always tell us, actually, in fact, he almost never tells us what is the question he's coming to address. So sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you look at the Rashi and you realize right away what the issue in the pasuk it is, what it is that is not understood otherwise, and it's clear what Rashi is addressing. And sometimes it takes a little digging, but you can't really begin to examine a Rashi and try to take it apart and figure out what Rashi is saying and look at the details until you've established the very basic idea, which is, what is Rashi coming to address over here? So in this instance over here, let's go back to the pasuk. The pasuk says, Lo yivaker ben teiv l'ra, don't inspect to see whether it's good or whether it's not good. What is difficult? That seems to be pretty straightforward. The pasuk is saying that whichever animal happens to come out, that's the animal that should be meiser, and you shouldn't start inspecting your animals and choosing your animals based on any set of criteria, whatever it may be. What's bothering Rashi? So the first thing that the Rebbe does in the Sikha is the Rebbe explains what's bothering Rashi is that there's an apparent redundancy from the previous pasuk. The previous pasuk says, Koil asher yaver tachas hashavet, which translates as, whichever animal goes beneath the staff. And as Rashi already explained in the previous pasuk, the process of how this meiser is separated. Again, you have that you put them all in a pen, you open up a narrow door. So we already know from the previous pasuk the process of how it works. And that process is a random one. All the animals are put together in the pen, in the enclosure, and then they go out. Whichever one happens to be the 10th one, that's the one that you chose. So what is the pasuk over here coming along and saying, Lo yivaker, not to inspect whether it's good or whether it's bad? That seems to be superfluous after what we already had in the previous pasuk. So therefore Rashi begins off and says, Lefi shenemar, because elsewhere the Torah says, V'chol mivchar nedrechem, which means that we're supposed to give the best. So I would think that yes, Taka, if I want to give meiser, the normal way to do it is put them all in a pen, let them all go out, and I'm going to pick the 10th one, whichever one it is, and it's completely random, that is the one that's meiser. But what if I want to be a mahader b'mitzvahs? What if I want to do it better? Because I've already seen another pasuk that says, V'chol mivchar nedrechem, that I'm supposed to bring the best of my animals. Wouldn't it be better, instead of going through the whole process, in other words, that whole process is, if I don't want to separate the cream of my crop, the top 10%, if I want to do it randomly, I'm allowed to do it that way. But what if I want to? I want to separate the top 10% and bring it as a carbon. So therefore the pasuk has to once again say, Lo yivaker. The The pasuk has to say, no, you can't do that. It's not only you are allowed to do it randomly, as implied in the previous pasuk, but that's the only option available. Lo yivaker, there's an isser, there's a prohibition. You're not allowed to inspect to see which one is good and which one is bad. So that is what Rashi is coming to address. As mentioned, however, sometimes when we figure out what Rashi is trying to say, that's when the problems begin. Because then we have to figure out, does the entire Rashi follow suit with the original premise of Rashi? So let's look at this Rashi again. And now we understand. Rashi is coming to tell us, what's Rashi being? Rashi is coming to be shoylol. Rashi is coming to negate the possibility of me taking out the best animal possible. What does Rashi continue? Rashi says, and let's do it again. Because the pasuk says v'chol mivchan edrechem, that you're supposed to ideally bring the best of your animals for a carbon. So I would think that you can actually select and take out the choicest of the animals. Therefore the pasuk says, therefore the pasuk says, no, don't inspect. We'd be good if we ended Rashi here, right? Because at that point, we already made our point. Rashi is saying, why does it say lo yivaker, not to inspect? Because otherwise I would think that you can take out the best. So therefore we say, no, you can't do that. What does Rashi continue? And he says, Bein tam, bein balmum, chala love kedusha. Whether the animal is complete, without blemish, or with a blemish, the kedusha applies to the animal. And as Rashi continues, not that you bring it as a carbon, but because you have to eat it, b'teiras meiser, and that you can't work or with the animal or shear it. Where does this come from? A balmum, an animal, it's a blemished animal? Again, Rashi's only here to address what the pasuk is saying and to try to make sense out of it. By now we know that when the pasuk says don't inspect, the meaning of that is don't take out your best animal. How do we know from the words lo yivaker, how do we know that the kedusha is chal on a balmum? Where does Rashi extract this from? Is it true in halacha that the kedusha is chal on a balmum? Yes, but Rashi is not a Shulchan Aruch. Rashi is not here to tell us what the halach is. Rashi is here to explain the pasuk. The pasuk only says, here's how you're supposed to do it, here's how the animals go out, and you're supposed to select them, and don't inspect to take out the best one. Comes along Rashi and says, and kedusha is chal even on a balmum. Where does Rashi get that from? So the Rebbe explains that comes not from the words lo yivaker, but from the following words in the pasuk, which is, the pasuk says, lo yivaker, don't inspect, bein toiv l'ra. Don't inspect to see whether it's good or whether it's bad. These words, bein toiv l'ra, are extra. Why? Again, let's go back to our original premise. From the original pasuk, we already know the standard procedure, how it's done. However, we might think that you can pull out a good one. Therefore, the pasuk says, lo yivaker, don't inspect. Okay, so we know what does it mean not to inspect? Don't inspect the animals to take out the best one. No one's thinking they can inspect the animals to take out the worst one. That's obvious that you can't do. So what are the words, bein toiv l'ra, coming to teach us? So that's what Rashi says, that with these words, the pasuk is teaching us something new. The word jura over here, the words a bad animal, doesn't mean an animal which is skinny and scrawny. It doesn't mean an animal which is gaunt. The ra over here means an animal which is a mum. And therefore, bein toiv l'ra means that don't even inspect to see whether the animal is kosher to be brought as a carbon or not, because even if it's ra, even if it can't be brought to the mizbeach, still, that is the meiser. And then Rashi proceeds to give us the details. What does it mean that this animal, which is a balmum, what does it mean that it's meiser? It can't be brought as a carbon after all. And the Rebbe points out something interesting also. If you look in this pasuk, it says, "V'hayahu usmurasai." The pasuk says, "Yihiyeh kodesh." Note the word "yihiyeh," shall be. And also in the previous pasuk, "Koil asher yaver tachas hashavat," whichever one goes beneath the staff, hoasiri, the 10th one, "Yihiyeh kodesh," should be holy. Now, for those familiar with Lashon HaKodesh, you know that word is extra, because just as easily the pasuk could have said, Koil asher yaver tachas hashavet, ho'asiri kodesh laHashem, the 10th one is holy. The same thing it could have said afterwards, Vayahu smurasei kodesh. What is the word yihya? So the Rebbe explains the word yihya, shall be, is a command. It's not telling you a mitzias. If it says Hoasiri kodesh, the 10th one is holy, it's telling you the fact. The fact of the matter is, the 10th one is holy. Yihya kodesh, shall be holy, is coming and telling us something. You shall treat it as something that's holy. So, in the normal case, when the meiser is an animal which is unblemished, what does it mean, Yihya kodesh? That's very simple. That means you have to take it now to Yerushalayim, to the Beis HaMikdash, and bring it as a carbon. But in the case of an animal which is a balmum, which is blemished, what does it mean, Yihya kodesh? In which way is it holy? It's just eaten. So the Rebbe says, so Rashi, the Rebbe explains, this is what Rashi is saying, the Yihya kodesh expresses itself in two ways. Number one, although I'm not saying the order properly in Rashi, and the order actually we'll see is very precise, but number one is that you're not allowed to work with it and you're not allowed to shear it. But that isn't enough. Why? Because that's shlili. That's a negative. There's nothing proactive that's being done to express the holiness of this animal. So Yihya kodesh also, Rashi says, it includes something which is proactive, which means that when it's eaten, when the animal is eaten, you have to have in mind that you're eating it for the purpose of the mitzvah of meiser. So the ending of Rashi, where Rashi explains what is done with this animal that's a balmum, is explaining what is, in Yiddish they would say, in was bashtet tehelakeit, and what, in how does the holiness express itself? And the answer is in a negative way, which is you're not allowed to share it, you're not allowed to work with it, but also in a positive way. The Rebbe points out, and this is also something that we've mentioned in the past, that very often the Rebbe would point out that in Rashi, embedded in Rashi, although we said earlier that Rashi is not Shulchan Aruch, but embedded within Rashi are very big chidushim in halacha. Almost by the way. In other words, it's not the intention of Rashi to do that, but almost by the way. And the Rebbe says this idea that the animal has to be eaten, the words of Rashi, Ye'ochel b'teiras meiser, has to be eaten as meiser, is something which we don't find anywhere in halacha elsewhere. No one else says that if an animal is a balmum, and therefore it does not have to be brought as a carbon, and instead it could be eaten by its owners, no one says that there's a special intention you have to have when you eat it. And this is a very big chiddush, swallowed up in Rashi. And by the way, when you're learning Rashi, Rashi's writing his pirush for a ben chamish lemikra. He's writing it for the 5-year-old child who's learning chumash. But by the way, the Rashi adds in incredible chidushim in halacha, and this is a chidush in halacha, that when the meiser is eaten, even if it's a balmum, it has to be eaten with the intention of eating meiser. And in the words of the Rebbe says, L'choira chidush gadolhu. L'choira, this is a very big chidush, because we don't find anyone else should say it. And it's not, we don't find this elsewhere, we don't find anyone else saying the same chidush. So with that we've concluded the analysis of the Rashi. But as we know, almost always when the Rebbe finished the practical analysis of Rashi, that's where the Rebbe turned to what he calls the Yena Shal Torah, which means the deeper element of Rashi, the secrets of Torah, the Primis Torah, the Kabbalah, and the Chassidus that is hidden in Rashi. And the Rebbe will bring out two ideas from this Rashi. So number one, although for those who are following the weekly cycle of the Sichas Parasha, you know that this Sikha we're not learning in its proper order. This Sikha is being learned during the week of Shavuos, not during the week of Bechukosai. But this very much connects to this week, which is the week of Shavuos. We know that one of the big questions that has bothered many over the years, and this question is expressed many times in Chassidus also, is the Yom Tov of Shavuos, which celebrates the giving of the Torah. What does that mean? What are we celebrating? What is the event that happened on Shavuos? Well, we know the event. We know that the Yidden were all gathered by Har Sinai. We know there was an incredible show, lights and sounds and thunders and lightning, and Hashem revealed himself to Klal Yisrael in a phenomenon which never happened beforehand, that Hashem should reveal himself to our entire nation, and something which has never happened since and will not repeat itself until Mashiach comes. So it was an incredible event. But what is the significance of the event? What changed? What is the implications of this event? So we always talk about Zman Matan Torah Seinu, the time when the Torah was given. But what does it mean the Torah was given? After all, we know that Avram learned Torah, and Yitzchak learned Torah, and Yaakov learned Torah. We know Yaakov went off. There was a yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever, we learned Torah, and we know that Shevet Levi and Mitzrayim they learned Torah. So the Yidden had Torah. So you're gonna argue, and you're gonna say, well, now was when they got the whole Torah. That's also incorrect. They didn't get the whole Torah at that time. The Torah wasn't completed until the day that Moshe passed away. The Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Moshe finished it. The last parasha was Eisa Bracha, and Zayin Adar, and the day he passed away, which was 40 years later. So if we're celebrating the completion of the Torah, that didn't happen on the 6th of Sivan. If we're celebrating the beginning of the receiving of Torah, that also didn't happen. So what happened? Again, we know that it was a phenomenal, spectacular event, but what is the significance of what happened? And there are answers on many levels. There's the answer on a simple level, and there's the answer on a halachic level. But according to Chassidus, the answer is, and it also reflects itself in halacha, the answer is that before the giving of the Torah, there was an inability for our physical material world to be permeated by holiness or by godliness, by kedusha. The physical and the spiritual, and more specifically the physical and the godly, remained two completely different realms, and there was an unbridgeable divide between the two. By Matan Torah, what happened was when Hashem came down on Har Sinai, there was a symbolism there. It wasn't only about Hashem coming down on Har Sinai then, but that kicked off the ability of every Yid to permeate the entire world with holiness, with Hashem, with Kedusha, with godliness, through learning Torah, but more so even through doing mitzvahs with physical objects. And the Rebbe explains that there are many different levels and gradations of infusing holiness in an object. So for example, even before you use an object for a mitzvah, there's a concept in halacha called hazmana. Hazmana means when I prepare something for a mitzvah. So if I prepare certain objects, let's say I prepare parchment to write a sefer Torah, or I prepare wool for tzitzis, there's already a certain level of kedusha that enters it even before the mitzvah was done with it. Then there is a higher level of kedusha when a mitzvah is actually done with something, and even there are different levels. There's what's called tashmishe kedusha and tashmishe mitzvah. Tashmishe mitzvah is an object which is designated for a mitzvah. It was designated, so for example, a shofar, or a lulav, or to actually tzitzis strings is another example of that, or schach for a sukkah. And those objects that were designated for a mitzvah, there's a certain degree of holiness that infuses them while the mitzvah is happening, and even after the mitzvah happens, it remains. Which is why tashmishe mitzvah, we don't throw them out into the garbage afterwards in a disgraceful way. We don't throw out the dilemma that everyone has every year, what to do with the lulav and esrog, because we don't throw it in the garbage. I'm not sure exactly what we do with it. The lulav, some people throw on Daran Kodesh, but the bottom line is we're not meant to throw it into a place which is what's called a makim bezoyin. Some people burn it with the chametz. Then there's a higher level which is called tashmishe kedusha. Tashmishe kedusha is like tefillin, or a sefer Torah, or a mezuzah. And these are holy not by virtue of the fact that a mitzvah is done with them, but because they contain Hashem's names. They are inherently holy. Not only because they're holy because they facilitate a mitzvah, they have actual holiness themselves. So we see there are many different levels of kedusha. And then the Rebbe points out, then there's the even lower level, which is, let's say you give money to tzedakah. That money is not tashmishe kedusha. So obviously it's not like a sefer Torah. It's not even tashmishe mitzvah because it's not designated for a mitzvah. It's like if I use a cup for kiddush, it's not tashmishe mitzvah. There has to be a designation for a mitzvah in order for it to be tashmishe mitzvah. But nevertheless, there's a certain element of kedusha that's in that money also. And the point being is that whenever we do our whole point of Torah mitzvahs down here in this world, as mentioned, ever since Matan Torah and Chag HaShavuos, the goal of everything is always to infuse everything with a kedusha. And it should be noticeable. There should be some sort of noticeable effect of the kedusha on that object. So when, going back to the mitzvah of Meiser, when a person gives Meiser behema, and it's brought as a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash, so the kedusha that you're bringing into the physical object, in this case being the animal, is obvious. But what about when the animal is a balmum? Says Rashi that even in such a case, because it's a mitzvah, There has to be some kedusha evident in the actual physical animal. And how does that express itself? It expresses itself in the fact that when it's eaten, it has to be eaten b'teiras meiser. You have to have in mind that you're eating it for the mitzvah of meiser. So that's a proactive act which expresses the kedusha in this animal. That is one point that the Rebbe speaks in this Rashi. And the last point the Rebbe says is very interesting. If you look at the Rashi says, remember I spoke about the order. Rashi says that the animal, yo'achol b'teiras meiser, it has to be eaten, and the person has to have in mind that it's meiser. And va'asr lihigazeh li'aved, and it is prohibited to shear the animal or to work with the animal. Now you think about it, that order is reversed. Because once you eat it, you can't obviously use it to work with it or to shear it. In other words, while it's still alive, you're not allowed to work with the animal. You're not allowed to use it for your work purposes. You're not allowed to shear it. And once you shecht it, that's when you have to eat it b'teiras meiser. But Rashi reverses the order. Why does Rashi reverse the order? So the Rebbe says another rule. There's the idea of sur meirav asei tov, which is that we're put here in the world and there's two things. We're given two jobs. Mitzvahs asei, which is proactive commandments. Do this and do that. Give tzedakah, daven, make kiddush, eat cheesecake on Shavuos, etc. Those are the positive things that we have to do. And then there are those things that we have to avoid. That's the mitzvah shleisa said, that's sur meirah, staying away from evil. So which one comes first, sur meirah or asei tov? So, for those of you familiar with the davening, we have it in the pasuk, and the pasuk says, sur meirah asei tov, abstain from evil and do good. Do no harm comes before doing benefit or being constructive. The Alter Rebbe gives a mashal for this. In one of his mamarim, the Alter Rebbe says, when you invite a king to visit your home, you have to make sure the home is sparkling clean before you invite the king in. And that's why sur meirah. First you have to clean out the filth. In other words, if you're still doing things that are prohibited, what is vasei tov? When you do a mitzvah, you're inviting Hashem into your life. So first you have to stay away from the evil, and then you can invite Hashem into your life. So the Rebbe says, even though practically speaking, the order might be, and by the way, as a side note, in other sikhs, the Rebbe turns even this around and says, practically speaking, also to begin with asei tov, but the Rebbe doesn't say it here in the sikha. We'll leave that for a different day, for a different time. But the Rebbe says, even though practically the order might be first sur meirah and then asei tov, but what is the goal? Is the goal sur meirah or is the goal asei tov? Did Hashem put us down here in the world so that we shouldn't do damage? Did Hashem give us a world and say, here's this perfect world, don't do damage? No. Hashem put us down here in the world for asei tov, to do mitzvahs and to bring elokus, godliness down here, and to make this world into dir b'tachteinim, to make it into a dwelling place for Him. That's the goal. Even if practically speaking we have to begin with sur meirah, front and center in the consciousness of a yid always has to be, what is my purpose? Why was I put down here in this world? Is to be constructive, is to accomplish and to achieve and to make this world into a dwelling place for Hashem. And therefore Rashi, which has mentioned, Rashi contains Yenu Shel Torah, the secrets of the Torah. Rashi reverses the order, even though that it doesn't follow the order. Rashi reverses the order, and first thing he says is, you have to eat it b'teiras meiser, which that's a positive thing. You have to bring kedusha into the animal. When you eat it, you have to have in mind that it's a mitzvah, and I'm eating it for meiser. And then the Rashi says, and by the way, there's some things that you have to stay away from. You're not allowed to work with the animal. You're not allowed to shear the animal. But that's of secondary importance. Maybe it comes first chronologically, but it's of secondary importance because ultimately we were put down here in this world and we were given the Torah. And what for? To make a difference and to make the world into Adira, Loi Yisbarach, over here in this world, B'tachtayna.